Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News Editor Kate Nagel. Here with Tom Piecuch, who is a URI Master Gardener, who's going to tell us everything we need to know about composting. You might be some master composters out there, but if you're a newbie like me who hasn't composted before, I've heard of it. Why should people compost?
Well, there's an environmental aspect to it. You save on the waste stream going to the central landfill. That's money that towns have to pay, and so you can save on your taxes.
There's a bottom line to composting. You heard it here.
There are two other reasons. You can decrease the amount of fertilizer you use in your garden. It has excellent water retention, so you don't need as much water. And I brought a sample of what it actually looks like. Took this out of my compost pile today.
Okay, here's some compost right here.
I don't know if you can see that, but this light, fluffy, it looks like soil, but it's not.
It looks exactly like soil.
Yeah, it's not. It's organic.
Organic matter.
Yeah, broken down by yard waste, food scraps, and I've got a list of
what you can and what you can't compost?
Yeah.
So question for you, you've got this kind of Panera-sized group of compost. How much material do we know does it take to make something of that size once it boils down?
You can use, ideally, if you can get a cubic yard of material, and there are various materials that you use to get this accomplished. And there's a kind of a recipe that they have, and they call it 3 pots carbon and 1 pot nitrogen. The nitrogen being green and the carbon brown. What that is you can use fruit and vegetable waste, eggshells, diseased or non-diseased expired plants, coffee grounds, coffee filters, tea bags, grass clippings. Now that's the nitrogen side,
okay.
The green. And that's 1 part you would add into it.
Yep.
And 3 parts would be the browns, which would be foliage, straw, bark, shredded paper, newspaper,
okay.
Wood chips, dryer lint, seaweed.
Dryer lint.
Dryer lint. And nitrogen also you can put in the hair. We groom our cat and dog, and we throw that right in too.
It is organic matter. So how do you recommend, keeping that 3-to-1 ratio, keeping track of it?
As you're putting it in, you put it in probably all at the same time.
Yeah.
Grass clippings, and you have your browns, which could be wood chips. In my case, it could even be some old compost that you're mixing in together, some leaves. And ideally, you start it in the fall because you've got most of your leaves and grass, and it makes up a whole mess of stuff to put in. Plus, you're cleaning up your garden at that time.
So maybe we're getting we've got the nuts and bolts of what goes in the compost, but where does one even start? Where do you choose a place to compost at your house?
That's up to the individual, and it depends whether you have a yard, if you're in an apartment, or you don't have a place to do it. And there are things that, structures that you can build. You can build a compost pile in your yard, in your garden, using, for instance, stakes and surrounding it with wire.
Okay.
And you build, putting material into that. If you are an apartment dweller and you don't have space to put a compost pile, you could use a worm bin. And if you go onto the internet, you can find all kinds of ways to fill it and the material you need for that.
So the worm bin, if you're in an apartment, and as you said, if you have space in your yard, staking it out, as you said, taking the stakes, kind of.
Yeah.
Is that the beginning part? Is you just start putting stuff on it, or is there more prep work needed?
No, it's that's about it. Once you don't even need a structure really. You could just pile it. The problem with that, you might have groundhogs or mice or whatever, and you can
find
keep
it
that
kind of
out.
attractive.
Yeah, and people kind of resent having that. But once you have that, then you want to start building. Once you have your structure, you want to start building it, and like I said, 1 pot nitrogen, 3 pots carbon. And so we would probably put some wood chips on the bottom. It kind of keeps the mice from coming up through, maybe 3, 4, 5 inches.
Okay.
Then you're going to put in some, your brown matter could be dried leaves, 5 or 6 inches. Then after that, you're going to put in grass clippings, which are your nitrogen, your food scraps, and that's probably about maybe 2 or 3 inches. And as the season goes on, you're going to build that up.
Okay.
Because most of us don't have all that material at one time.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So what if how do you accommodate that?
Yeah, every week or every day you're putting stuff in. We
Yeah.
put food scraps in every day.
Yes.
And grass, we cut that once a week. And the key here is you want to keep that balance, and also you want to make sure that you've got enough air. It needs air and water, and so you've got to turn it. And if you can't turn it, you can take a spike or a stick and kind of just move it aside so that air can get into the pile.
How often do you have to aerate this pile?
About once a week.
Okay.
Once a week. There are some people who have tumblers, and they sit up off the ground, and they're filled, and they just go out there every couple of days sometimes and turn it.
So they're tumblers. I mean, what does a tumbler actually even look like? Is it the tool, or is it where you contain it?
I'm sorry, it's a cylinder. Or
That's the actual container. Okay.
Yeah. They're kind of popular, especially with people who don't have a big area to build a pile.
So they put it in the tumbler. Now, what am I holding here?
That's a worm. Well, if you have no place to put a compost pile, there is a place that you can, or a structure that you can use. It's called a worm tube. As you can see, all it is a drainage pipe with holes at the bottom. You sink this into the ground up to so that all the holes are underneath.
Okay.
And the idea is you're going to put in your food scraps through the top. And what happens is you put that on the ground, you put this cap over it, you put the food scraps in there, and if you have worms, introduce them into the worm tube. Or if you have worms in your soil, they'll just find their way, and they'll break that down for you nicely.
So why would you separate just the food scraps in the worm tube? How does this work with your regular compost pile?
Regular compost pile is going to be a structure that's where you can use yard waste and food scraps. Where this one, you're only going to put food scraps in.
You're only putting the food scraps in?
Yeah, there's not enough room.
Okay.
And chances are you're probably going to need one per family member, because if you have a family, you're going to go through more food scraps.
So how, when you put the stuff in, and this, just the worm tube, how quickly does it turn? How quickly do you get this?
That's a good question. What we do is we turn this for about 3 or 4 weeks, and in that process it's going to heat up.
Okay.
And that heat-loving microorganisms are going to chemically reduce this and decompose it. And then after about 3 or 4 weeks, you're going to let it go into this mature phase where it cools down, and you're going to let mites and earthworms go through it, and they're going to degrade it even more. So at the end of basically about 8 to 12 weeks, you've got a substance like this, which we call humus.
And so the 8 to 12 week process, and you said turning it over, can you actually tell the temperature of your compost when you're in there doing it?
That's a good thing
you're
you
like,
said
ooh,
that.
that's warm. Ooh, that's cold. Should you be taking the temperature of your compost?
No, you don't need to take a temperature. You can tell when it's warm. But for real serious composters, they have what they call these compost thermometers, and it's a long stick, long thermometer, and you just place it and probe right into the compost pile. And you're trying to get a temperature in the range of 120 to 150, and the whole idea of getting it up to that temperature range, it kills pathogens and weed seeds.
Okay.
Okay, so the goal is to heat it up to that temperature. You don't have to, even if you can get it up to 100, some decomposition, some heat-loving organisms or microorganisms are going to help you in the decomposition phase.
How do the seasons impact composting? Does it impact, or is it just the stuff just keeps on doing its stuff regardless of the season?
It does. I would say in the spring, summer, and fall, it can really build up. But it's kind of, if you have a cubic yard, it's going to stay warm inside. But since you can't get out there, I can't get out because of the snow to my compost pile. Maybe once a week we'll go out there and throw all our food scraps in. But there's no grass to put in or anything like that. But it'll still decompose.
What happens when you get snow?
Well, we trudge out there, we clear the snow off, we put it in, and we usually put a cover, have dug a hole previously, and just fill it in, and then put the cover back on, and we're waiting for the next week.
So maybe think of it of things you have to do during a storm, address your sidewalks, address your driveway, address your compost heap.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. And some people just can't get out there, and they probably put it in their trash, which we would hope they can minimize.
And are there any common mistakes? You talk about the 3-to-1 ratio. Is there any way to screw up compost?
No, it's gonna decompose no matter what you do. The microorganisms are gonna get in there, and they'll go through a chemical process to decompose it. The problems that we normally have are compost pile is either too dry or too wet. If it's too wet, it can start to smell foul. If it's too dry, it's not going to go through the process completely because those living organisms have to have water to survive. The worms need water to survive also.
And you talked about, again, mice and creatures. So if you're going out and you're putting food scraps out, you have a couple apple cores, maybe a couple banana peels. Are critters an issue? Do they get carried away by...
No, that's the one thing I probably didn't
or the gas is too much and they just won't go near it.
No, they probably would love it. But what you're going to do is you're going to bury all your food scraps in the pile. You'll never place them on top.
Make sure the food scraps are buried.
Yeah, and can be a common mistake that people do. But we generally just take a shovel or a pitchfork and just push it aside about 6 inches down, put the food scraps in, cover it back up.
Now, do you have the prototypical 1 square yard of compost, or is your backyard like composting Shangri-La?
No, I have a large pile, and we produce an awful lot.
And you brought some in here today. So once you have it, and you're a gardener, so how do you mix it in with what you're looking to grow once you have the final product?
You can broadcast it over the entire garden, or you can put it, if you don't have enough, you can put it in, dig a hole when you're going to put your plant in, and just mix it in with some chemical fertilizer if you choose, and water it, and you're off and running.
Okay, we've got it right here with us.
And the key thing is that our mantra is feed the soil, not feed the plant, because really it's the microorganisms in the soil that are going to break down the minerals for the roots of the plant to absorb the fertilizer that they need.
And you talk about you have your own personal composting pile, but you're also involved with community gardening. Do we see compost at a lot of community gardens around the state?
Yeah, every community garden probably has one. Ours does. It has a number of them. We meet once a month where all the members come down. We offer educational classes on that, usually for about an hour. And we just had a composting class. But there's a variety of structures there, from tumblers to compost piles that are just freestanding, and people are always coming down asking about how to compost.
Is it sort of, like riding a bike seems a little daunting at first, and like, how am I going to get it right? And then once you're off to the races, it's just secondhand. Yeah,
it's not bad. We've gone to farmer markets where we, put out a table and give people advice, or they come over, and a lot of times it's just they haven't kept either the carb-nitrogen ratio, or they haven't got the water right. It's moist, and there's a test for water too. You'd grab the compost and you squeeze it in your hand, and if more than a couple drops come out, it's too wet.
You need some more brown matter?
No, it needs more water if it's
dry. No, if you have too much, I thought you said you had too much water.
Yeah, if you have too much water, then you're going to put in brown matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, what if kids hear about this like at school, and they're really jazzed and intrigued, and they go home to mom and dad? Is this something that kids can get involved with and really take the helm on?
Yeah, they can. Usually we want some parent helping them though. And once they find the spot they want to put it, and if they're into gardening, you can kind of help them along with instruction on how to build a compost pile and how to maintain it.
And people can watch after the fact here. Where are good resources if they're like, okay, well, I kind of got the lay of the land. I might have more questions. Where do you tell folks to go?
URI has a website that has instruction on on gardening tips, on composting, soil conditions. I even go to YouTube, and YouTube was a great source for how to build and maintain a worm bin. Worm tubes were a big thing on YouTube.
I gotta take this back here, because with the holes at the bottom, where does one get or make a worm tube?
Well, that you buy at a hardware store,
Okay, go
Home Depot.
to your
and,
local hardware store and say, I need a worm tube.
Yeah, no, a drainage pipe, and then you use a drill and drill the holes into it, and you can put worms in it if you don't have it, and you can go on the internet and find places that will send you worms.
They
5
send
pounds.
worms through the mail?
Yeah, they do. It's a small container, really small
The
container.
worms are here.
The worms are here, yeah.
Well, how many worms would you order if you needed some worms?
Well, that's a small tube, so it's not like a compost pile. Compost pile, you probably need about 1,000, and that, you're going to put maybe 100 in there. It's not, but your soils should have some worms, and they're just going to go through those holes. They're going to decompose, chew away at the organic matter in there, and they're going to kind of move back in outside this tube, and their castings are going to be spread. So you're getting your compost automatically spread.
You're getting your bang for your buck with this worm tube.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, everything you wanted to learn about composting and more, you have all your notes, so there's got to be other things that we need to hit upon before we let you go.
One thing I want to talk about, some people use fresh manure, which is good, but there's a 120-day rule for that. Fresh manure may have pathogens in it. We advise them to spread it after your season is done, your growing season is done, let's say November 1st. Spread it on your gardens. The 120-day rule will take you through, let's say, March.
Okay.
And it's safe to use. You never want to spread manure on a plant that you're going to start harvesting crops from because of the pathogens.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you're using manure, start November.
And don't forget, and also, if you're composting and you're going to use this in your vegetable garden, don't use grass clippings that have a herbicide mixed in. No weed and feed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's difficult, but you can use it in your flower gardens,
Okay.
which is a good source. But your chemical fertilizers only have 3 chemicals in them, three elements in them. With this compost, you're going to get a lot more. You're going to get trace elements. It's going to have some nitrogen, but the one thing you got to remember: this is not a fertilizer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a soil amendment.
It's a soil amendment. And so how does it, as you said, it just provides those trace elements? Do you get bigger, brighter plants? Do you get bigger, shinier tomatoes?
Well, you're going to get a healthier plant. Plants that rely just on chemical fertilizers tend to grow, especially nitrogen, are going to grow remarkably fast, but they tend to be weaker, and you're going to attract insects and bite and other insects that are drawn by that nitrogen fix, and they're going to attack it, and it's just not a healthy situation.
I didn't know that bugs had a nitrogen fix.
Yeah, there's some that do.
So you put some compost in there that keeps them at bay? Makes it not as attractive?
No, it grows naturally. The plant grows naturally at a good rate. It's a stronger plant, and your water's going to be, you won't have to water as often, which is a big plus for a lot of people.
So you've got your compost pile. How big is your garden at home? How much are you using?
Oh, I use it all. I probably have a couple cubic yards of this a year that we go through. And I can tell it's healthier. We don't use, we hardly spray at all. We used to spray. I used to spray, but now I don't.
Don't have to spray? Magic of composting?
There are some bugs that still hit some of my plants, but the tomatoes look good. The zucchinis have some problems.
And what if you go to the farmers markets and you see compost, if you don't have a compost pile? I mean, is there a big market for people to bring their excess compost and say, here you go, you can buy it?
Oh, you can buy composted material at a garden center. in a bag at these garden centers. And they're good, they're seasoned, they're mature, and you can use them on anything right away, even in your vegetable garden.
Everything you've wanted to know about composting and more. Anything that we've missed, Tom, here that we need to let folks know about?
No, just, you know, if you just remember, feed the soil. That's the big thing.
Feed the soil. That's what this composting does. Tom, I appreciate you taking the time to come in, let folks know a little bit more about composting. Again, you can go to the URI website, find out more information there if you've got additional questions. But this is a pretty, I think, really good primer.
Yeah.
We've let folks know how to compost. So, Tom Piecuch, thank you for coming in today.
Okay.
I appreciate it.